I first started questioning the official story in 2008. For years, I had believed and aggressively defended the official story. I went out to New York after 9/11 happened to show support and attend funerals, and to just be there in any way I could. And I was down at Ground Zero, several days when we watched them pull out just pieces, and it was, so emotional, and I just couldn't go there. And so I was so angry, and I just wanted, when I was told that what terrorists did it, I just wanted to attack. I mean, I was just in that mode where I wanted revenge, really, is what it came down to. And so I really couldn't go there. And my lieutenant for years had been asking me, he'd been questioning me about it. And he just pointed out things that didn't make sense. And he was talking about Tower 7 and I really didn't even know about Tower 7. I'd seen it those first few days, but I just erased it from my memory. And now looking back on it, it was because it was shown the first few days in the media, but it wasn't ever talked about again. And it's still not really shown that often. And so he kept trying to bring that up. And I wouldn't even watch his videos. I wouldn't watch anything. I wouldn't look at the pictures because I thought he was crazy. And what I didn't understand is he wasn't questioning our country. He was questioning an event. I started looking at the evidence. I saw some things that didn't make sense. And being a firefighter, I realized when I saw this evidence, I've been in enough fires. What we're saying with Firefighters for 9/11 Truth is there's evidence that doesn't make sense. Not only that it doesn't make sense, we're saying that there's national standards that need to be followed. And when I started looking into that, I went into the investigation manual. And so it's called the NFPA 921, and it's the Guide for Fire and Explosions and Investigations. It's a guideline. And so it's a resource for investigators to follow. And it's really designed for investigators of smaller departments that don't have the big investigation units that have their own, standard operating procedures. And it's also designed to bring the country's investigation system together. And we call it, in firefighting, we call that the incident command system. And so I went and I got the manual from 2001, and it became the national standard. I believe it was in February of 2001. And I started looking at that, and I said, what should they have looked for? Because I found out that they didn't test for explosives. And the more I started researching, and I went back and I looked at the footage from the original days of 9/11, there were all kinds of firefighters and civilians that were reporting explosions. And so just the fact that there were explosions means they need to be investigated. We had terrorists, they used explosives in 93. We had witnesses to explosions. We have audio recording of explosions. We have overwhelming evidence that there were some explosive events. They should have tested for the explosives. And it's in the NFPA 921, it's under exotic accelerants. They bring up thermite specifically. And we had 118 first responders report explosions. We had witnesses, tons of witnesses, and we have the audio recordings. We should have tested for it. I mean, it's a common sense thing. At a routine house fire, and several neighbors tell you, oh yeah, we saw flashes go off on 3 of the floors at the same time. It looked like the fire started in the whole building at the same time. It's a no-brainer. We're going to test that thing for explosives. Any firefighter would know. We're looking for the point of origin, and we're always looking for any indicators. And a lot of times most of the time we'll interview, witnesses or family members or whoever was there. What did you see? What did you hear? Kind of thing. And so if we had reports from neighbors that they said they saw flashes on all 3 floors, at the same time or close to the same time, we're going to suspect accelerants were used. Gasoline, kerosene, any type of accelerant. But we're going to test it for that. We're going to look for the indicators, and we're going to test it. So the fact on 9/11, we had 3,000, Americans murdered, and we had the first 3 high-rise and steel collapses. We have all these reports of explosions. We have the history of terrorists using explosives. There's no excuse for it. It's criminal, in my opinion. It's absolutely criminal that they refuse to follow the national standards. And the national standards say that they should be testing that for explosives. And one of the excuses NIST used they have 2 major excuses why they didn't test for it. And one of them was that it would have been hard. It would have been unlikely. It would have been difficult to bring 100 pounds or more of thermite into a structure. Well, the manual gets into thermite. And if it says if you have melted steel or concrete, which we had on 9/11, and there's videos of it, people can see it. You can also see the FDNY talking about it, where it came down in streams. And again, from an investigative standpoint, that doesn't prove that was molten metal, but because we had witnesses that they saw metal coming down the channel rails, they need to test for it. Again, it's not proving it, but we should test for it. So the fact that they're not testing for it is crazy. But one of NIST's other excuses was that there were no blast sounds heard by witnesses or recorded. Well, go to our website, Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, and you can just YouTube it. There's so many videos of witnesses from that day that report explosions. There's radio transmissions from the FDNY. We have the transcripts that were recorded, back in 2001 of all these firefighters and first responders reporting explosions. There's no doubt they were heard, so they were there. So the fact that NIST says that is absolutely In my opinion, it's criminal. The other thing, though, that Chapter 18 shows is that the sound of an explosion is not a necessary component to have an explosive. So, thermite typically doesn't have that loud boom effect. It's more of a burn. It's a high intense burn. And so they don't address that. The manual does. It says when you have melted steel or concrete, you test for thermite. And so it's not normal for any jet fuel, which is basically kerosene, even gasoline. It's not normal for any of those type of kerosene or petroleum fuels to be able to melt steel. It just can't happen. And at Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, that's what we're asking for. Is we're asking for an investigation that follows national standards. And NIST, when they did their report, they had absolutely zero evidence for Tower 7. They destroyed all the steel, all the basically the bones of the building that would have told us how this first high-rise steel structure in history that hadn't been struck by an airplane, all it had was a few fires on several floors, and it had only been burning for a few hours. We've had other high-rises burn much longer. This was one of the shortest burning high-rises actually it's the shortest burning high-rise for a complete failure. The way we could have learned from this was analyzing that, looking at the steel and seeing how this collapsed and how it failed and which steel members did what. Well, we can't do that because what they did immediately after 9/11 was they started removing the steel, the debris from Tower 7 and all the towers immediately. They sent it off to China to be recycled. So they never had any physical evidence to do the investigation. So that needs to be investigated. I mean, the national standards are very clear. We have preservation of evidence. We have spoliation of evidence. There's all kinds of basically standards that you don't destroy evidence. I mean, anybody with common sense knows you can't investigate something unless you have the stuff to look at.